Well, you have some work that has helped us deal with change. We've done some discussions about real time. What do you mean by real time, and why is this important?
Well, I've sort of picked up on that term because when I started my career in computers in the 60s, computers were just information machines. But as the gap between inputs and outputs got smaller and smaller, the machines transformed from reporting to actually performing. And that was called real-time computing. What I observe is happening today is that the gap between the future and the past is getting smaller and smaller. I think most of us think of that as just accelerating change. But at the end of the day, what it means is that we can't trust our predictions and forecasts the way we used to. And more importantly, we can't rely on the past to tell us what to do in the future. Previously, you'd learn from your parents, and you'd learn from your educational system. You'd acquire knowledge, and then you would apply that conventional wisdom and recipes to try to tell you what to do next. And I think that belief system is no longer viable and no longer working, and that we can no longer rely on the past to tell us what to do in the future. The metaphor that I'm most comfortable using is Star Trek. We literally are going where no one's gone before, and we don't have maps, and we aren't even exactly sure what our destination is. No one can predict the future, but whatever's happening is transforming not only our world, but our relationship to that world and what it means to be a human being.
I want to just dive into this immediately because my own personal experience is that the change is so rapid that I have spent hours each day learning something new just because I have to, just because you can't assume that it's done the way it was done before. Paying bills, talking on the telephone, ordering something. These things are changing every day. Some of them are exciting, but
No, that's true, and I think that's an important distinction, is that all this change isn't bad. It's just that the rate of change is disorienting us, and as you said, we're learning new things, and quite frequently what we've just learned is obsolete before we learn it. So we find ourselves, constantly being assaulted with new apps, new situations, new tweets, whatever particular thing is coming at us. It's coming at us at an accelerating rate, and it's basically leaving a lot of people either paralyzed, in denial, resigned, anxious, and a few of us are looking at how can we prepare ourselves for a future that we can't predict and can't even have any idea what it's going to be. So whether the future is a golden age of transformation, or whether the future is some kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger dystopian Terminator reality, who knows? But the point is, can we prepare ourselves for the unanticipated future, regardless of what it is?
well, I think about your comments about the education system. The fact is that that's not the nature of the structure. It's rooted in learning the past fundamentally.
Absolutely.
How do you think we could possibly change the education system to help us adapt?
Well, I think the possibility of change is huge. I think that the process of bringing about change in education is much more difficult because probably education is the most culturally embedded institution that we have. It's usually the keeper of the way it is. And as a consequence, I'm not very optimistic about our capacity to change it. But what I think is emerging or will emerge are new formats for education, largely internet-based probably, that focus on how we relate, how we listen, how we communicate, how we deal with uncertainty, how we begin to examine who we are as human beings and see that we have many, many choices that most of us aren't even aware we have. That my view, for example, is that while we don't have a lot of control over what's happening, we always have a choice in how we relate to what's happening. And therein is the freedom to actually design a way of being and a way of relating with the future that can have you have a satisfying, meaningful, and generally successful life.
Well, you speak to a lot of people around the globe. I mean, when I speak to you, sometimes you're in Turkey, sometimes you're in Latin America. What are the leaders outside of the U.S. saying about the change here? What are the challenges they're dealing with as compared to us?
Well, obviously, I think a lot of the conversations are in a political context in terms of the changes in our general policies and strategies as a country, independent of what you think of a particular political administration. I think that mostly people are disoriented overseas. I think that they are confused. I think that they are, like a lot of Americans, keeping their fingers crossed that there will be some form of at least consistency and rationality to whatever policies, be they conservative or liberal. I think that the issue is not so much conservative versus liberal. I think that it's really organized around globalization versus nationalization, around is climate change a central, perhaps the most important issue, or isn't it? Are we capable as a human species to deal with the kind of unprecedented change that we're dealing with? How do we begin to get a grapple, or how do we grapple with things like corruption, which is undermining and destroying many, many institutions? So the issue is not so much can we, I think it's more a function of will we, and where are the institutional structures that can hold that kind of change. And right now, I don't know that we have got that institution. I mean, I suppose the closest thing we have is business, and hopefully business can begin to see that the long-range viability of their enterprise is going to be dependent upon the kind of political health and environmental well-being that we all live in.
That's such a strange idea for me because, for so many years I studied under, in my graduate course, a professor who was concerned about corporate power. But as you speak it may be the corporate structures that maintain our way of life that go beyond our nation states. That's such an interesting idea that I hadn't thought about that our culture may be preserved by our corporate legacy.
It could be. I don't know. I mean, I think you have to think from a certain perspective. Whatever the future is going to be largely a function of power. And if you then ask yourself, well, where is the power today? I think the power today is clearly with business. In some countries, I think there's still a huge amount of political power, as in China, for example. But if you look in at least the Western world, most of our institutions are weaker than they have been, and that the businesses and the oligarchies and the capitalistic structure is pretty much playing the tune that the rest of us are dancing to. I don't know that that's inherently good or bad, but I do believe that it's going to shape the way the world looks. There was an interesting presentation by the ex-financial minister of Greece. I was reading about it yesterday, and he was saying that the structure of capitalism and globalization is really in a reformulation. And most of the people that are thinking long range realize that you can't sustain business if there aren't a lot of customers that can pay for your products and services. So the income equality problem and a lot of those sorts of things will probably sort themselves out, but it's going to look very different than anything we can imagine today.
What's always intriguing to me and why I like working with you, Jim, is looking at, after you've set the stage for what's going on out there, is to ask you what you are doing as an individual in your life to deal with change. What's your practice? What are your personal ways of living each day to adjust to this?
Well, a couple of things. I think that in general, life gets more and more simple and straightforward as you get older. I'm pretty clear that my value of living or my quality of life is not a function of material stuff. It has to do with my health. It has to do with my relationships. The stuff that's pretty standard thinking for anybody that's probably over 60 years old. Life comes about relationships and health and well-being and creativity and a sense of being valued. So I'm spending more and more time locally taking care of people around me and teaching where I can teach and attempting to share what wisdom I've got with the people around me. I find that my notion of wisdom is that wisdom is more of an action than a piece of information or insight.
Wisdom is a, say that again, I'm not sure, and say it a little more slowly.
I'm growing to appreciate that wisdom is not just an insight or a piece of knowledge or information. That wisdom is more to do with my ability to take the experience I've had and the learning that I've acquired in my life and give it to another person, but give it to them in a way that brings out the best in them. So it's really about not just giving it away, but giving it away in a way that lets the next generation stand on our shoulders and hopefully not have to reinvent the wheel.
On that note, I think we've said it, Jim. Is there anything you'd like to add that I've not asked you about?
Well, actually, I want to point to something. I noticed that the picture behind you are these stepping stones.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I teach is the idea that breakdowns and problems that we're dealing with, many of them are huge and intractable, are actually the stepping stones to breakthroughs. So that I'm very optimistic that really all of these difficulties that we're encountering at the end of the day are going to be the stepping stones that have allowed us to accomplish whatever unimaginably, hopefully great future we're going to all enjoy.
Well, I agree with that, and I thought we were at the end, but I would say that for the first time in a long time since the anti-war period, I feel called on to take action. I'm not sure that we can get through this period without taking to the streets, without going to the polls, without really consciously taking a stand for what we believe in, without again going into the trap of talking politics. Just looking at the condition we're in, we have to take some action.
I think it is about action. I make a distinction between being an activist and taking action, however. I'm certainly not against activism. On the other hand, I'm not very optimistic that activism makes that much difference. I think it tends to swing the pendulum back and forth. I think, on the other hand, if we can begin to focus on what's missing, and if we can take a more creative approach to the future, I think ultimately that will prevail and will essentially transcend and or overcome some of the caca that's existing in the public space. I have a belief that when paradigms collide, and I think we're right now in a kind of paradigm conflicted situation, that the one that will prevail is the one that can include the other. And I think that's why the civil rights movement and a lot of other movements like that have not been trying to fix reality, but create new reality, have been successful, at least to the degree they have. So at least I'm hopeful that humanity, love, and caring will ultimately carry the day, and that will be the future that we enjoy.